Bonus Tracks is the official blog of Spotlight On, online at spotlightonpodcast.com/blog. There you'll find additional artist interviews, music commentary, and more. Have a look. Hello and welcome to Spotlight On, a production of 23 Media Ventures. I'm your host, Lawrence Purrier. Today the spotlight shines on guitarist and banjoist Brandon Seabrook, hot off the release of his new album, Brutal Love Champ, on Pyroclastic Records. Brandon is known for pushing his music past the far reaches of the extreme, fusing elements from punk, jazz, pop, and metal. His music has been called abrasive and angular, with an intense focus on virtuosity. But Brutal Love Champ covers new ground. With his octet Epic Proportions, Brandon explores beauty, personal emotion, and a lyricism not usually associated with his music. In his liner notes for the record, he describes the album as a departure and intimate and vast. Our conversation was vast as well, covering Brandon's early life, his affinity for 80s metal, and his move to more vulnerable, less process-driven music, as well as his reasonings of why for this shift. Brutal Love Champ is out now, wherever you get your music, but you can stay tuned for the end of this episode to hear the track The Perils of Self-Betterment by Brandon Seabrook's Epic Proportions. Brandon, how are you?
How you doing? How's my sound?
You sound almost as good as you look.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I got my mic out.
No, I should have gotten you a mic stand. I feel bad.
No, I like holding it.
Okay.
I do have a stand, but
if the whole music thing doesn't work out, you could host a game show.
I would love it. Or stand-up comedy. That's my dream.
There you go. There you go. That's actually, now we're going to go out of order because...
okay, yeah, sure.
I wanted to ask you later in our discussion, but since you went there, what, if any, role does humor play in your music?
Oh, I think it plays a lot. I think a lot of the segues, some of the way that I cram many styles into a section or what I pull from. I mean, I think there's a lot of humor in there. Yeah, I definitely go for that. And I think I don't go for it, but it just comes out because I like absurdity and I find the humor in so many things. And I mean, music can be so fun. But what did Frank Zappa ask? Does humor belong in music?
Yeah.
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah, I can't get more specific than that. But of course, I mean, if you hear some of my music, whether it's a display of hilarious technical skill or really layered, I think there's humor. You can find humor in all of it.
And you also went the other place I wanted to go, which was Zappa, because
oh yeah,
it's interesting listening to your music because it's very hard to place, right? Like it's not like you could say, "Oh, that was a Pat Metheny lick in that guitar."
Oh, well, I love Pat Metheny. Yeah, I wish I could do that, but yeah.
What does he do that you wish you could do?
No, I love his fluidity, his lyricism, and the way his just technique. But I think he's influenced me a lot. I mean, he's influenced me, the attitude of doing your own thing, developing your own sound. I love the production of his albums. When I record an album, I definitely think about using the studio as an instrument, a tool. And I've always liked that about him, all of his records, even if it's just a trio album or a Pat Metheny group. I don't know. He's just one of those artists that I really admire, even though I don't sound anything like him. But that's a good thing.
Yeah, of course. Of course.
Anyway, keep going.
Yeah, well, what I'd love to do, both for the benefit of myself and the listening audience, is I'd love to start a little bit at the beginning. I know you're here to talk about the current project, but I'd love to set the table a little bit. I personally couldn't find out a lot about your prehistory, and I'm wondering, like, where are you from? What's your life before Boston?
Oh, my God. It's not too exciting, but I'm from Foxborough, Massachusetts, which is a small town right between Providence and Boston, off 95, one of those.
495, that junction.
Yeah. A lot of traffic, a lot of little towns, football stadium. I was lucky that my town had a pretty incredible music program. So that was somewhere that I could really explore and experiment and learn so much. And so that was really helpful. The Foxborough School's music department was really great. So I learned a lot about music. Duke Ellington, Vincent Persichetti, Beethoven, whatever. And a lot of musicians from Boston would come and teach at our school. Matt Wilson and Alan Dawson. I remember when I was really young, he came for a while and was doing workshops with us. That was great. And that was Stephen C. Massey, who's a great band director. He's since retired, but he really had an amazing program there. Learned a lot of repertoire, a lot of like everything from Duke Ellington, Stan Kenton to Bob Mintzer, while simultaneously in the suburbs, you could call it boredom or not much to do. But when you find your friends who play music, that's all you do. You find the other people who have a drum set or an amp, and you just listen to records and play every day because there is really nothing else to do.
What were the first records that were yours that you chose as opposed to having imposed on you or just in the house?
Sure. Well, that would probably be Motley Crue, Theater of Pain was the first record that I bought with my own money. That was exciting.
I saw that tour.
Oh my God. Yeah. So that was, and I remember just looking at the record sleeve at home, thinking to myself, wow, this is nuts. I'm never going to be able to do this. Yeah. And then it soon went there. The blues-based hard rock, hair metal, which I loved, was really a portal into so many other things. Once you started going back to more classic rock, and they stole everything from the blues, and then you get into the blues, and then from there, jazz. And so that was the starting point. It was like the hair metal of the 80s.
Yeah.
For me, it was big. So I bought all those records, then I started buying more classic rock, Led Zeppelin, and that led to finding out about Willie Dixon, and that led to Sonny Boy Williamson, and then back around to Frank Zappa, to jazz, to Edgar Varese, to Stockhausen through Zappa, and We're Only in It for the Money was a big record for me when I heard that in high school. That was crazy. And then Freak Out with a list of he thanked all these musicians on the Freak Out cover or inside panel gatefold. So I was just looking at all these names, writing them down, trying to find, because in the 80s you had to go to the record store. They ordered it for you, and then punk rock and the SST catalog, and they had a mailing list. So I would just send away for records, and it's just, so that was it.
I hear a lot in your experience. I guess I shouldn't be surprised, but it resonates deeply for me. I grew up outside of New Haven, Connecticut. I know Foxborough and Mansfield from going to the venues up there, Great Woods, and going to the stage.
Oh, yeah.
You would road trip up there all the time.
Those were their only venue. Those were the venues, sort of.
Those were it.
Right? That was it then, back
for
then.
a long time. Yeah.
Yeah.
We had the New Haven Coliseum, and all the hair metal bands came through there. Like that's where Motley Crue, Rat.
Oh yeah,
everybody
Rat. Oh
came
my God.
through. The experience that you mentioned that really resonates for me is this idea of that, like your contemporary music being the springboard backwards, obviously through the rock canon. But I had a very similar experience in how that led me into the jazz world as well, because those artists would, not the hair metal guys, but Zappa, for me, a lot of it was the Grateful Dead talking about John Coltrane. And people who have listened to this podcast have probably heard me say more than once that, I got into Coltrane. It was difficult because one of the guys in the Dead mentioned Africa Brass. And, I was like 15 years old and I went and bought it on cassette. And it's like, well, if they say it's good.
Exactly.
I mean, it's probably one of, if not my favorite pieces of work at this point in my life. But at that time, it was like, what the hell? It was like a wall. It was like running into a brick wall.
Yeah. It also reminds me that it was also these hair metal guys, some of them were like a portal into film. I remember specifically this interview with Steve Stevens from Billy Idol, who said that he loved film music and that he was really into the Fellini movies, Juliet of the Spirits and Armor Court. I know I read this in a Guitar World magazine and I was like, what is that? What is this guy talking about? What are these words? Who's Fellini? What is this? Is this a person? And I remember reading that and it stuck in my mind, and I didn't see any of those films then, but I made a note of it. And then when I got a little bit older and moved to Boston, and the video store was a little deeper catalog, I remember that and I would find it out. So it's funny. You don't think, you never know what they're listening to, because that's the only thing I was reading. I was reading Guitar World and Guitar Player through the rock guys, which I still love and still listen to all the time. And going back to it, it's actually fascinating that sound world is so crazy, especially the drums. You could talk about like electronic music, John Cage, David Tudor, but if you think about the drum production on some of that stuff, it's like the snare drums sound like they're in the Grand Canyon, and the bass drums with all these gates. Really incredible sound experiments, if you ask me. That's how I hear it now, that this was actually sound that was it's pretty intense. Maybe some people would think it's horrible and disagree, but there's an intensity to that sound world that's kind of wild, over the top. If you just took the hair and the outfits away, because All right, this is the last hair metal thing, but I was recently listening to a interview with George Lynch and Dawkins, and they shared the same manager as Metallica, and he asked those guys once in the 80s, like, why don't you just wear your street clothes? You look so much better. Like, the music is good, but the image, just get rid of this image. So I feel like if we could just listen to that music and see those guys just playing, and okay, but I'll stop with that now because I could talk about hair metal all day. This is not what you were thinking.
It's all right. No, hey, I brought it up. You talked about hair metal without the hair and the costumes, and the first thing I thought of was the Smashing Pumpkins. That's
yeah, there you go.
Hair metal minus the costumes is the Smashing
Pearl
Pumpkins.
Jam, all those bands. It's basically classic rock without the hairspray. I mean, if you look at those early Pearl Jam videos, they have like a crazy drum set, like a total over the top kind of prog drum set. Their riffs, their Hendrix riffs. There's just rock and roll. But of course, by that point, we needed a refreshing a little bit.
Well, and it never hurts to like cite punk rock to increase your credibility a little bit. Was your punk rock consumption limited to recorded music, or were you going into Providence? Or like,
I was going to Providence a lot. Yeah, Providence was great because it was it was like a little closer than Boston. It was a smaller city, and they had the AS220 and Club Babyhead. And I actually started playing a lot of gigs there in high school at the AS220, which was a great space. It's still going. But yeah, I'd go there and play. I'd go there and see shows, go to record stores in Providence. Bought a lot of records there. It was great to be so close to Providence. I also played gigs in Boston and stuff and would go in there, but Providence was closer. And yeah, Providence is a gritty city. It hasn't really changed, I don't think. Maybe it has, but
I've been back. I can't remember how long, but I've definitely been there within the last, call it 10 or 12 years. And what struck me was it was actually beautiful. And I didn't remember it as being beautiful.
Well, maybe it's more beautiful now. I don't know. Maybe it definitely did a lot of pretty big makeover to a lot of the neighborhoods.
Yeah, I think they did that thing that the small cities do where like they've reclaimed some of the old theaters, they've reclaimed the waterfront and made it more livable.
Because it was the epicenter of the mafia, Providence. The Angiulo family was running the show, the East Coast out of Providence, Federal Hill. It's kind of fun. Buddy Cianci, all these characters.
Yeah. It's interesting also for me to talk to you specifically. As I was preparing for our time together, there was something I felt like I either was going to say and tell you or not say and tell you. And I think I'm just going to say and tell you.
Oh, just tell me, yeah.
I moved to New York in the mid-late 90s.
Nice.
And I was there until, say, the mid-late teens of, the last few years. Before that, I was driving down from Connecticut to go to the knitting factory and the kitchen and like goes, so like the world of like John Zorn and Bill Laswell, all those guys were like very influential for me. And I always thought I was a musical omnivore. Like I thought I could find good music. And I'm not as familiar with your discography as I felt I should be. But rather than frame it as a negative, after sitting with it for a little bit, what I realized was it's just another testament to how much music there is. And when you think you have climbed a certain mountain, there's just a bigger mountain behind it.
It's incredible, yeah.
It really is incredible. But
not my discography, a fact of, And so I just want to clear that up. Have it clearing that up.
But the other thing that stood out for me was maybe it's in every city or every scene, but the uptown downtown divide, if you will. And you mentioned Matt Wilson. And I talked to him a dozen or so years ago for a different publication. He seems like one of those people that can do the respect the bandstand, wear a suit thing, or he could go downtown and chop it up with everybody that's playing out and making noise. And before that, I hadn't really thought that the worlds overlapped. Part of it, just my own ignorance, my own perspective. But something digging into your music that was really amazing was I saw a video of you playing with Francesco Mela.
Oh, yeah.
And I had only known him from playing with McCoy Tyner.
Yeah, it's a new thing for him, I think. That's what he did. Yeah, that's freely improvising, and that was a band put together by the bassist Henry Frazier. Yeah, he's in this new world for him doing that.
How do you feel about that divide? Do you recognize it? Do you aspire to jump any kind of figurative divide? Like, how do you think about that?
I play it with a lot of different things. I never think of it as divide. I don't know. The older I get, the more I'm playing. I don't think of it like that. I just, I pride myself on one of my things that I think that I can offer is that I can play with anybody. sound I can kind of fit in anywhere. That's something I've taken pride in, and I play in a lot of different situations. But there is definitely a divide between like hard bebop and free jazz or experimental. But I don't play into that thing, that divide, uptown, downtown. It doesn't make sense to me, even though it is a thing. It's just I don't pay much attention to it.
Do you perceive gatekeepers, or are there rooms that you would want to play in that you're locked out of?
You know what? Not really. I like the rooms. I think I'm in the right rooms, mostly rooms of my own making at this point. I like so much music, and I go see a lot of things that aren't anything like what I do, and I respect my space. I think I'm not going to try to get in on something that's too outside of my wheelhouse, but occasionally I do. I mean, I play in this large ensemble with Cecile McLaurin-Salvant, this big band. She has a project, a song cycle called Ogress. It's a multimedia piece, and it's like a 13-piece chamber group. And it's a really cool mixture because there are these incredible jazz players in there. Warren Wolf, Helen Sung, really post-bop, this language, this crazy bebop language. And then there's somebody like me who doesn't have that language at all. But it's sort of a testament to New York and just the way that these artists, just because you're a bebopper or play this certain style doesn't mean that it can't all work. And it's a really beautiful piece and a really beautiful space where all these different artists come together with completely different backgrounds. So that's really fun. I feel like that only happens in New York, but I could be wrong. But anyway, it's arranged by Darcy James Argue, and he put this band together, this wild band together of people from all these different practices. I mean, mostly under the jazz umbrella. I mean, I guess I consider myself, I can be a jazz musician, but not like these players. I mean, they're burning bebop players and really something else. And I'm not. And there's a couple of situations where I have to play over these changes and these different sorts of things, which is challenging and fun. But anyway, yeah.
Do you modify your axes at all?
Occasionally I may maybe tune the low E string down, but no, they're not modified. I mean, I might use a capo or an alligator clip, but no, they're not.
Those are all in the realm of orthodoxy.
Yeah, it's yeah. I mean, people ask me sometimes, like, how do you tune your guitar, man? And I'm just like, just standard tuning. I can experiment with alternate tunings in the studio, or if I write a piece with an alternate tuning, which I'm kind of working with now, but I can't go out there and play written music or go to a session or play someone's music with alternate tunings. Yeah.
You have to think too hard.
Yeah. I can't do it. Because the banjo is tuned in fifths and the mandolin. So I've learned that different tuning over the years. It took a few years, but I have that. But with guitar, no. In banjos, in fifths, and I don't really mess with it.
Yeah. I'm sure that this is not a novel question. It's novel if I ask it. Novel for me. What's the why behind your affinity for the banjo?
I picked it up in college. I went to New England Conservatory, and I had a great teacher there named Hank Snetsky, and he ran the klezmer Eastern European folk music ensemble. So I joined that, and he said to me, do you ever play the tenor banjo? The tenor banjo's a big part of that music. Anyway, to make a long story short, I got one out of the music library, and I started playing that music on it, and I just took a few lessons, and I just kind of started to bring it around because it's so different from the guitar, because there is no sustain on the tenor banjo, very little sustain. So it was completely different than guitar. It was a new challenge, and you have to employ this technique, the tremoloing technique, which is the rapid movement of the plectrum to create a sustain. I was already kind of doing that on guitar, and I like that technique, but it really came together when I started to play tenor banjo. And I just love the physicality of it, the tactile sensation of it, which is a big part of why I do a lot of the things I do on guitar and banjo. It almost comes from the physical sensation of it. So the tremoloing is very tactile in the wrist. And I started bringing the banjo to gigs and banging around on it, learning how to learning how to play it, learning how to play pieces, read music on it. And then the two were very separate, like guitar and banjo were like, the sound worlds were kind of separate. And then they just kind of started to come together, and one influenced the other. And yeah, I love it. I mean, I love folk instruments, acoustic instruments. I think it's a great foil for the electric guitar, which can sustain for weeks, days, and years. And it's also a challenge, to try to do something different with the tenor banjo, which is stuck in the early jazz, Irish music kind of thing.
Kind of Dixieland.
Yeah, the 5-string banjo has more practitioners of the experimental, like Eugene Chadbourne plays the 5-string. But I love bluegrass and folk music, and also playing more instruments is helpful when you're a freelancer. Some people only know me as a banjoist. Some people only know me as a guitarist. Some know me together, and I also play mandolin. And so I just fell in love with it. I fell in love with the challenge of it.
Would you ever succumb to a traditional bluegrass project?
The tenor banjo is not really set up for it because the bluegrass banjo is a 5-string banjo and it has the drone string.
Gotcha.
And it's tuned a little lower, and it's tuned as a triad, I think. I did have one for a while. I think my brother has it now, but I don't think so. I don't really have those that scene is very, talk about uptown, downtown.
Those guys just blow, man. Oh my God.
Yeah, those guys are just that language, that vocabulary is incredible. And I just don't have that set of chops, or that would take a long, long time. There was a bluegrass jam here in New York in the West Village. Do you remember that place? It was in the West Village. I can't remember what it was called. There was a bluegrass jam.
Wasn't there a Sunday one? I don't remember
Maybe.
if that was in the Village or if I'm confusing it. It might have been out at Sonny's in Brooklyn.
This one was in the Village. I feel like it was Wednesdays, but they had like a front room, a middle room, and a back room. It was just, and I remember I brought my tenor banjo there a couple of times and sort of got the stink.
Who's
guy.
this hoodlum?
Yeah, exactly. Which I totally respect. So, but I definitely use, from my brief time playing the 5-string banjo, I mean, I definitely employ some bluegrass sounding things, like a faux bluegrass, like try to bring out the sonorities of the banjo when I can, and in certain sort of fake bluegrass, the sound of that, I can mimic it. I can sort of, a non-banjo player wouldn't really be able to tell. And maybe even a banjo player wouldn't be able to tell. Because I've listened to bluegrass and I love the sound, and I want to be able to bring some of that in. You know, it's in my music a little bit. You might say it's like not the vocabulary or the history, but the sound, something I pull from, but it's not like hardcore bluegrass vocabulary.
We'll be back with more Spotlight On right after this break. Bonus Tracks, the official blog of Spotlight On, is currently accepting submissions for reviews and opinion pieces related to the topics we cover in the podcast. We're looking for engaging, insightful, and well-written articles that offer critical analysis and thoughtful commentary on various aspects of music. To learn more, visit spotlightonpodcast.com and click on Call for Submissions. Thanks. And now, back to Spotlight On. There's something else that's really fun about encountering your music for the first time, which is the way people talk about it. It's amazing. Like, I've read a bunch of press clippings and other interviews, like introductions to interviews. It's like some of that stuff's like the best advertising. I'm just like, ooh, this sounds this sounds barbaric. I like it.
Yeah, that's good. Well, I'm glad you think it's fun, because I music is fun, and I try to make it fun.
Yeah. The magic clusterfuck of merciless banjo torture was the best one.
That's the Christopher Weingarten from the Village Voice. Yeah.
I mean, you have to have shirts made with that.
Manic clusterfuck of merciless banjo torture. Yeah, I used to use that. I should bring that back. I'm going to bring that back.
Yeah.
That's from like 2011 or 12. I got to bring that one back.
Hey, man, if it's still true, well, you know.
It's still true.
Talk to me a little bit about the idea of an octet. Both the idea of what it means for you in terms of a sonic palette, but also the practicalities of navigating and captaining a large ensemble.
Yeah. Well, I always love the challenge, band leading. I really enjoy band leading and putting together bands. And because I come from band, like my life, like from early on in high school, I loved bands. I loved pulling off a tight set with a band. You rehearse it a lot. You just have these players together. So I've always tried to keep that going. And this octet used to be a sextet called Ditromo Fatale. So it's some of those same people. And over the years, I added a few other people. So I really wanted to keep it going. Yeah, expanded the palette to another bass player, contrabass, clarinet, percussion. Yeah, I mean, I love large groups, you know, Duke Ellington, Zappa, whatever, chamber groups. So I wanted to do that, but challenge myself to embrace more space, more lyricism, longer forms, because a lot of my music before is very manic, you know, a manic clusterfuck. Wanted to get it sort of slow it down into sort of a little bit more of a spacious happening, not a clusterfuck. Yeah, so I really pushed myself for this record with the octet to really just slow things down and write for each player and try to really, yeah, embrace lyricism. I really wanted to do that. Because a lot of the music I love is very lyrical. And before, I used to always think that I had to be the clusterfuck. I had to grab your attention. I had to be bash you over the head with all these really quick dichotomous things that are just flying all over the place with rapid fire, machine guns, millions of notes, crazy arrangements. With this record, I really wanted to just develop as a composer, just try new techniques and things that I've been thinking about and been listening to. So my band, they're an incredible band. They are like the most punctual, dedicated, passionate, crazy people. And I was so lucky to have them. It's just an amazing thing to keep a band going. And then to keep from the sextet to the octet. And then we played a few shows and we put a record out. And it's quite a feat to do it. And that was part of the challenge of it. I wanted to see if I could do this, put this crazy thing together. And
as a composer, there's lots of tools in the toolbox you can draw from, or a lot of voices you can grab. And there's no prescribed octet necessarily.
Right.
So how do you land on those voices? Is this just a manifestation of what you're hearing in your head, or did you assemble them and then write for them?
Yeah, well, I'm more process based and less conceptual. I'm process focused and based. I'm not coming up with a concept for the group, but I'm thinking about certain techniques that I want to really get into. Just basic things like, I really like the polystylistic things of like Alfred Schnittke and throwing everything in, but just simple techniques that I've always enjoyed, canon, 12th tone, things like that. And I sit down to write that, and I sit down to write melodies with chord changes. I just wanted to explore more harmony in this record, because my other records before, there's harmony, but it's pretty atonal and it's not really rooted in too much form. The form is another thing that I wanted to expand upon. Yeah, I just take these ideas, these technical things, and I just start experimenting with them. And then as I get a sort of a bass gesture or feeling or motive, and then I start to sort of orchestrate it throughout the group. It might not, I'm not sitting down being like cello part, bass part, keyboard part, drum part. I just come up with the overall feeling, melodic content, motives, rhythmic ideas, and then I send it around the group. And it's always a learning process for me. I'm not really a composer, like big C. I'm not, but I learned so much from this record and working with these people that I'm just thinking about the next one, like this one is just like, it's over and I learned so much. And
it makes me wonder, despite you saying you're not a composer, was there an element of like not being recognized or getting your due as a composer because of the more virtuosic technical nature of what you were doing before? It's like, because to me as an observer, I see so much of the commentary focused on those stylistic elements of your playing as opposed to commentary on composition.
Yeah, it's because I never really dove into the composition side of it before. It was all about the technique and this onslaught of millions of notes. So this is my first sort of foray into larger form composition with employing these different techniques.
Were you afraid to leave stuff out in the past? Like, why did you? Because when I hear you verbalize it, it's a little bit of like a kitchen sink approach. It doesn't come across that way as a listener, quite honestly.
Right.
But I hear you saying it like you had to get all the statements made all at once.
Yeah, I just felt like I wasn't confident. I just felt like I had to be shock and awe and mercurial and crazy. And
you're like the Guar of jazz.
Yeah, exactly. I felt like that. I felt like, yeah, I had to do that maybe to cover up some things that I didn't have the confidence to do, but I feel like I really got that out of my system, and it was just time to slow things down. And I think it's had positive results, and it's exciting. And I'm working on a new solo album right now, actually. The last one I put out was 10 years ago, Silford Vitalizers, and that's an onslaught but this one, of course, I'm just it's going to be very different. So yeah, I'm just excited about opening up. Maybe it was just a confidence thing or insecurity. I have to be the person that's going wild all the time, but I let that go. I got that out of my system,
Yeah. You said that you're not really conceptual, you're more process driven, and maybe this question's been answered, but I love to talk about this with instrumental musicians and composers, which is there any element of narrative in your work, in your songs?
Oh, And this last record, there's definitely more narrative element. But before, I don't know. I wasn't thinking about it. If the narrative is just screaming and yelling, or just a completely jam-packed narrative of, I love Robert Altman and I love his films, and his narrative is always just so crammed. There's so many dialogues happening. If you listen to some of those films with headphones, it's crazy, the mix. And he was the first to use like a 10 channel or 12 channel mixer on some of his films.
Wow, that's interesting.
So that was kind of where I was always coming from. I always loved that. And I always thought that why not have just a dense narrative all the time? Why not just have an onslaught narrative kind of thing? But with this record, the octet record, you can hear things being passed around. There's more of an arc. There's form. There's a statement, and then a development, and then back to the statement. And then, although I don't usually like to go back, I guess that's my anti-jazz thing. I don't do like AA.
You don't revisit?
Like, sometimes, but I always like that sort of like straight ahead narrative. Like you just keep going. You never come back in a really formal type of way.
I like that too. I have to be honest with you.
I like that. I mean, yeah, but I don't know. The narrative before was always just this kind of like static, dense thing. You could say there's a narrative in there, although I wasn't really thinking about it.
Yeah, I guess intention was sort of at the root of my question is, do you sit down and say, there's a story I'm telling here with sound or with music or with melodic selection or anything like that?
Yeah, no, not in the previous stuff. That was definitely a thought with this new record. How can I slow things down? It's not an impenetrable wall of sound. Although I thought this octet record, I was doing it more, which I am, but I still get occasionally like people are like, what is going on here? I'm trying to bring it back even a little bit more, slow it down even more. I didn't slow it down enough.
Yeah, I mean, I think I can understand what you're saying, and there's moments, there's crescendos, or there's intensity,
there's dynamics, there's intensity.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, rather than continue to ask you to deconstruct yourself, let me ask one more question along those lines.
Yeah.
What, if anything, is the significance of song titles? That's another thing that I love to explore with instrumental musicians, because some people tell me they don't mean anything to me. In fact, I barely even choose them. I just tell somebody name the songs.
Well, you can tell when that happens. Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Well, as a listener, I can't always.
Yeah. No, I mean, just when you read the title, you're like, oh, they just thought of this last minute. Like,
yeah. It's like one click too clever.
Yeah, like I don't know, like Dust. Come on, you got to do better than that. Unless there's no lyrics. I'm writing down words all the time and phrases and reading stuff and taking stuff out of context. And I've always been like that. I love words. Like, this would make a great title. On the octet record, some of the title are connected more with the piece, with the overall feeling I was trying to go for.
I love some of the titles.
Yeah, I think they go with it. I think some of I want to be chlorophylled is just this, like, I want to just break out of my skin, my body. I just want to deconstruct myself. It kind of goes with it. Or compassion montage. The pieces reminds me of this is a compassionate montage. Oh my God, that's so corny, but they go in there. I think about them. I mean, and sometimes it's just funny. It's just words that I love the sound of, the way they go together. I have notebooks and notes of words and tons of words. I'm always writing phrases down, stealing them. I've stole so many phrases. I think there's one on there that I from Lucid to Ludicrous. I stole it. Mark Fisher was a great writer and theorist and thinker, and he wrote a lot about music. So I think that was not completely stolen from him, but I think he had another phrase just like that, and maybe I changed. I took it to the word lucid and ludicrous. I forget what his was, but yeah.
I like the Perils of Self-Betterment. That was
Perils
a pretty good
of Self-Betterment. Yeah, that was. That's a tense song, and I could see that being someone's anxiety about trying to keep up with what they say is the healthiest way to live your life.
That's interesting. That I really appreciate you sharing that as the creator of it, because the way I heard it, or what it touched in me, was that the peril of maybe outgrowing someone or something you care about, because now it's like that notion of once you know something, you can't unlearn it. And so you're forced to confront the fact that, maybe I'm taking a step that people aren't coming with me, or thinking you are. That's even worse, right? People get into a spiritual path or they get into a new practice, and all of a sudden they have the accoutrement and they start to adopt it. But it's like, it's not inward yet.
Absolutely. That was in there too. That was in my thought for that title, for sure. I also just stole so many titles from Succession. When I would watch the show, it was just like there's just too many, and I would write them all down. I have a ton of those.
It's funny. I have a little note file as well of one-liners or 3 or 4
Yeah.
phrases. Yeah. So as somebody who seems to have a restless or a curious musical spirit,
Yeah.
you've gone now from the sextet record to the octet. You've got a solo record coming. Is there a future for the octet? Is there the idea that you would have a band, or now is it like tomorrow? Is it a nonette?
Well, no. We have some gigs next year. It's a special occasion kind of group. I mean, if we can play 3 or 4 times a year, that's great. Maybe we'll record another record. And I actually was thinking about expanding the band a little bit, maybe, because why not? Yeah, there is a life for the group. We're going to play next year. We have some gigs lined up, and I'm trying to write new stuff and maybe add some new colors, and it's exciting. I mean, I'm not worried about doing too much with the group. I'm trying to do less, but make it better. If we can do a handful of things in a year and make them really, really good and meaningful, that's really satisfying to me and the band, because I don't want to bring the band out for just any old thing. I definitely I'm thinking about them first and foremost and their time. And is this going to be fun for everybody? Is this going to be worth everyone's while? So that drives my decision. But they're great. Sometimes it's hard to accept. I don't know, people are so kind to you and so giving of their time, and they're so into it. So anyway, there is a future for that band. And you're right. Good question. I think it could be a non-net or a 10-tet at some point, because why not? I don't know.
You have such a different orchestration or instrumentation that you're playing with a different palette, basically.
Yeah. And I've only touched the surface of the palette on this record. I mean, right when the record was done, I was like, oh, okay, now I know what I really want to do. So I feel like this record, it's good. We got it together and we made some nice music, but now I know what we need to do to really take advantage of what the palette could be,
There's a really cool video on your YouTube channel of the octet playing.
Oh yeah. Did you see it?
Yeah, it's super striking the way everybody occupied the space.
Not much space.
But I mean, to be in the middle of that looks exciting.
It's exciting. It's so fun. We pulled it off. Like I said, bands are the most. I get jazzed the most about a band. You work on the set, you play a really tight set, and that energy just can't be replaced by. I mean, I play a lot of improv sets and concerts that aren't built around a set list, but I love the most fun I could have is make a set list and you play it every night and you just make it exciting. The presentation is really important for me, how you present your set, like segues between songs. And that's what jazzed me up. I can't even believe I'm saying it. I never say that jazzes me up. But punk rock, when you see a Circle Jerk set or Black Flag set, or you see a Husker Du or Bad Brains, it's just like, I mean, I'll never get to that intensity with this band, at least but that's the kind of energy that I want to have with my own bands, my sets. That's what drives me. So when we can pull that off, it's the best.
I think you need a Bad Brains cover album.
Yeah, maybe, but it's like on banjo, right? That would actually probably... I'd be doing a lot of podcasts if I made that.
What a band. What a band. Could you tell me a little bit about your compositional process? Like, are you sitting down with a piece of paper and writing out parts? And like, what instrument do you compose within your hands? Are you at a piano? Are you at a guitar?
Well, for this octet record, I really needed to get away from the guitar and how I would usually compose with a guitar. So I used a lot of keyboard. And like I said, a lot of the techniques before, the process driven, like canon or serialism. Also, just rhythmic compositions would start on paper or start with a motive on the piano. So I think you could tell, I mean, on this octet record, there's a lot of melodic content that hadn't appeared before, or harmonic content. And that came from using the piano and also composing somewhat by chance on paper and trying different things, constructing demos. And I used a lot of, Logic, and to also compose some of these pieces and get it together like that. So it was away from the guitar, which was good, which really freed things up. And I'm doing that now, even for this solo record that I'm writing with guitar. I'm using keyboard a lot, piano a lot, which is really helpful, which a lot of composers that I admire and friends have always written off their instrument. I wish that I had better piano chops, but I'm just clunking out. I have enough that I can just bash it out or just experiment. But that was the process for this. It's pretty simple. I mean, I really tried to take one idea and mangle the most I can out of it. I'm an economical composer, you know.
That's excellent.
I like economy in my ideas. I tell students that all the time. People come improvise. People come to study with me improvisation, and they play like 7 million ideas in a minute. And I always start them like, whoa, whoa, whoa! Just let's play that first thing you played, or it's the first thing I play on guitar, first thing I think about or on keyboard. I'll just start with that and try to, and maybe I'll throw it out. Maybe it sucks, but it's not this like elaborate approach that I have, or this crazy like room of paper everywhere, or like boards, you know,
note cards. And
I am trying to get better at organizing myself with that, and note cards do help, and like a poster board does help, which I'm trying to, especially when you're dealing with a lot of people. But
I have no reason to believe it's part of your process, but I hear similarities between some of your work and the way some of Zorn's game pieces come across. Like there's a spontaneity in your interplay with the musicians that sounds very real time.
We actually have sort of a game piece, although in our live set with the octet, we have some conduction pieces, which we actually didn't get a chance to record because we had so much material. We can get to it, but that's actually it's a part of our live set. And yeah, I love doing that. I mean, I love improvisation and chants. And
do you use prompts for yourself? Like, you know, there's the classic Brian Eno card deck and all that.
No, but I don't, but I think about that. I'm thinking about using them. Yeah, because the danger of making a solo album is like being too focused on the guitar for me, even though I am getting off of it. But that's actually a good idea. You know, I do think about using prompts and trying to get into that. So I think I might.
One last quick question. Given that, at least to my ears, it is very difficult to tease out who your pantheon is, who your people are. Would you mind, like, are there a couple of artists, either guitarists or composers, that are like, this is my stuff. This is what I love.
This is what I love. My kind of music. Yeah. I mean, it's mostly like rock and roll and stuff like that. It's pretty normal stuff, you know, anywhere from Husker Du, like that's my kind of music, to the Minutemen, to Schoenberg and Messiaen. That's like my kind of music. Or recently I've been really getting into the Bob Dylan Rolling Thunder Review. Just, this is my kind of music. Rock and roll, just dangerous rock and roll is just my kind of music. And I mean, that's it. I just try to call that energy. It's more of these things I listen to, Schoenberg or Bob Dylan or whatever. It's just like taking the energy of it and the intensity of it and using that as a springboard, you know?
Yeah.
And also some of the techniques I try to investigate. I'm self-taught in that way. I've taken a few composition lessons, but I do a lot of score study. I look at a lot of scores and I just steal stuff right out of there because it's never going to come out the same.
Goes through the blender.
It goes through the blender. And so I guess it's just the energy, the danger of rock and roll mixed with the, I don't know if you want to call it sophistication of classical composition, even though I can't call myself a classical composer at all, but that's a big influence too.
Were you a Sonny Sharrock guy at all?
Yeah, a little bit later on. I mean, I love Ask the Ages. That was an incredible album, big record. And yeah, that record he did guitar is great. And those early records he made with his wife on there. And I mean, he's on those Herbie Man. I liked it. I liked him. He was influential. Maybe not as much as John McLaughlin or Pete Cozy or Jim Hall, people like that. But I definitely, Sonny Sharrock was incredible.
I mean, pound for pound, you're not going to get better tone than Jim Hall. I mean, that's just, insanity.
Yeah. I got a transcription in college of one of his comping, not a solo, but how he comped behind Paul Desmond on the song When Joanna Loved Me from one of those quartet records. I got the comping transcription and like, oh wow, I never thought of that. Let's see what like accompaniment. It's so important. I had one teacher in college say, if you want to get gigs, learn how to accompany. Don't learn how to solo. No one cares about that, which is a lot of truth to that. Yeah, Jim Hall blew my mind with some of his choices and the way he would deal with chords with just two notes and not full chord voicings, and sometimes just a rhythmic attack of his playing. And because a lot of my playing is not necessarily about the notes. It's just about the attack and the rhythm and the timbre. And I feel like Jim Hall is one of those jazz guitarists. Is like, of course, he's a genius master of the notes, but I feel like a lot of his comping, his playing is just based on attack and timbre, which I was drawn to. Felt like punk rock to me. It felt, a little bit of a different approach than the normal full chord jazz guitar sort of accompaniment. Yeah. Which he did do too, obviously, but
I really appreciate the worlds you straddle and the sounds that you straddle. Just for me as a listener, it's right up my alley,
Oh,
and
wow. Thanks.
so I really appreciate that.
Well, thanks for having me because I need to get better at this. I mean, talking about my stuff. I remember I think it was Anthony Braxton that said, you need to learn how to talk about your music if there's one thing you do. So,
Thank you so much, Brandon Seabrook. And as always, thank you for listening to Spotlight On, a production of 23 Media Ventures. I'm your host and executive producer, Lawrence Purrier. We're produced and edited by Michael Donaldson, and theme music is by Q-Burn's Abstract Message. For past episodes, web-only exclusives, to make a donation to support our production, and to join our mailing list, visit us online at spotlightonpodcast.com. Thanks for listening, be safe, and stay in touch. And now, The Perils of Self-Betterment by Brandon Seabrook's Epic Proportions.